Buried Memories by Lazy Palpitation 517. I used to love camping when I was a kid, exploring the outdoors, climbing trees, the smell of marshmallows roasting on a fire, and sleeping under the stars. Nature was my happy place, where I felt most at peace. Not anymore, though. Not since my best friend disappeared. It was a cool October evening when I was loading the last cardboard box into the moving van. I was finally moving out of my parents' house and into my first apartment. Just as I was getting ready to close the van door, my mom stepped out of the garage holding an old plastic tote. "Hang on, I found some more of your stuff in the attic." I shook my head. I don't think I'll have room for anything else. The apartment is small, and I don't want to fill it with my old junk. "Are you sure?" she asked, setting down the tote and popping it open. "There may be something in here you want." I closed the door and turned to face her. "I'm sure. I have enough crap to get organized as it is." "Oh, it's your old camping stuff, and look, it's..." She trailed off as she held up an old, battered blue backpack. The backpack I had taken on my last camping trip, nearly 10 years ago. "I'll just put this stuff back," she said, dropping the backpack back into the tote and reaching for the lid. I reached out and stopped her. "No, it's okay." I bent down and retrieved the backpack from the tote. Seeing it again, after all this time, it brought back a lot of memories, a lot of feelings, a lot of fear. I haven't seen this in a long time. Mom put her hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked. She knew what this backpack meant to me. Knew what had happened on that trip. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna head up to my room for a little bit." She looked down at the faded blue pack I clutched to my chest. "Okay. I'm here if you need to talk." I made my way through the house and up the staircase to my room. I closed the door and sat the backpack on my bed. I hadn't opened it since that last trip. For a long while, I just stared at it, my mind flooded with feelings I had long forgotten. The smell of the campfire, climbing trees and rocks, running through the forest, Kyle and I laughing at my dad's jokes. Kyle, wondering where he had gone. The fear I felt when I thought someone took him. I thought back to that time in the woods, my last camping trip. When I was 12, my grandparents bought an abandoned piece of land with the hopes of fixing the place up and flipping it. There was a long winding path that led to an old rundown house, surrounded by dense forest. The whole property was about 60 acres of mostly forested land. As a kid, it seemed like the perfect place to explore and find something or somewhere lost or forgotten by time. Our first time visiting the property, I remember how excited Grandpa was to get started renovating the dilapidated house. My mother was always telling him that he was getting too old to be doing this kind of work. Grandpa would just smile and say, "Probably so, but as long as I can, I will." That's how he was, a strong, determined man. If he saw something that needed to be done, then by God, if he could do it, he would. I think I miss that about him the most. That and his ability to make people smile, even in the darkest of times. like a few months later, when he got the cancer diagnosis. I'll never forget how he just kept on smiling all the way to the end, never letting anyone see the pain he had to be in. The old house never did get renovated. After Grandpa passed, Grandma didn't want to keep the property. She said it was his project, and that she didn't want to deal with it anymore. We all understood, even if I was a little disappointed. I had just begun my exploration and hadn't made it nearly as far into the woods as I wanted. I had planned to bring my best friend Kyle out for a camping trip, but it had begun to look like that wouldn't happen. A few days after, Grandma decided not to keep the property. My dad surprised me when I got home from school with a fully packed Jeep for a weekend camping trip. He smiled when he saw my excitement and said, "We have access to the land for a little while yet. I know how badly you wanted to explore the woods, so hurry in and get packed. We're burning daylight." Shaking with excitement, I ran up and hugged my dad. "Oh wait," I said. "Can we call and see if Kyle can come?" Dad smiled. "Sure thing, kiddo. Now run along and I'll give his parents a call." After running to my room and quickly packing some clothes and my survival gear, a canteen, a compass, a lighter, and my cheapo military surplus survival knife, I ran outside and jumped into the waiting Jeep. "Did you call Kyle's house?" I asked. Dad nodded. "I did. He should be ready when we get there." "Yes!" I exclaimed. After the short drive to Kyle's house, the half-hour drive out to the property felt like an eternity. On the way, we talked about what we might find in the forest. "Maybe we will find an old abandoned gold mine," said Kyle. "Or an old army bunker, or a fallout shelter," I added. Looking back now, I realize how ridiculous we must have sounded to my dad. But, being the guy he was, he just joined in with us. "Or maybe you'll find an old cave system, where outlaws used to hide their treasure." Kyle's mouth dropped open. "No way, did they really do that?" I nodded excitedly. "I heard that Jesse James, he hid all his money in a cave somewhere." When we finally got to the property, it was just after 5 p.m. After hurriedly setting up our tents near the tree line, we waved goodbye to my dad as we headed into the forest and left him to finish setting up the camp. We had a lot of ground to cover, and not nearly enough time to do it. "Did you remember the paper?" I asked. He nodded as he took off his backpack. "I got it in colored pencils. That way we can make the map super detailed." Kyle had been designated the cartographer for the weekend. We both know we probably wouldn't be able to come back out here after this camping trip, but we didn't care. We were going to make the best of the time we had. After about an hour of trekking through the dense trees and seeing nothing of interest except an impressively massive boulder that we climbed all over, we decided to head back to camp. We had so much fun that day, exploring the forest and drawing out our map. That evening, after we had eaten our hot dogs and marshmallows, we sat around the campfire late into the night, talking, joking, and telling spooky stories. Eventually, the three of us climbed into our tents and drifted off to sleep, not a worry in the world. Sometime later, I had woken up screaming from a nightmare. When Dad finally got to my tent and calmed me down, we realized something was wrong. Kyle's tent was wide open, and he was gone. The police searched the forest, but never found him. They say he ran away. But I remember at the time I didn't believe that. I was convinced he had been kidnapped. But I think I just couldn't accept that my best friend would run away without telling me. It was no secret that Kyle didn't have the best home life. His parents fought all the time, and they usually blamed him. He always had new bruises and new stories of how he got them, but I think we all knew. It made sense that he ran away, even if I couldn't accept it. I could never bring myself to go camping again after that. I stood there, staring down at the backpack. My hands trembled as I reached for the zipper. After all this time, I still couldn't open it. Why the hell couldn't I open it? There was a knock on my door. Will, are you all right? I shook off the feeling and threw the pack over my shoulder before opening the door and facing my mom. Yeah, I'm fine. I think I will take this with me after all. Mom nodded. Okay. Did you? I think I'm gonna head out early, I said, interrupting her. You're not staying for dinner? She asked as I stepped past her. No, I think I'm just gonna head over to the apartment. Lots of unpacking to do. After saying goodbye to Mom and Dad, I made my way across town to my new apartment building. I had the van rented for the whole weekend, so I decided I'd just unpack tomorrow. The apartment was small and bare. So far, all I had set up was my bed, an old couch from my parents' garage, and a dining table I got from Craigslist. I tossed the backpack on the couch and took a couple ibuprofen before flopping down onto my bed. Thinking back to that time had given me a monster of a headache. But after a few minutes of lying there, I drifted off to sleep. Gradually, I became aware of a sound coming from somewhere in the apartment. Someone was whispering. I focused my hearing but couldn't make out any of the words. I thought that surely it had to be coming from one of the neighboring apartments. But had I left the front room light on? I leaned up and looked through the bedroom door into the front room. The blue backpack still lay there on the couch, only now it was open. Not wide open, but fully unzipped. A faint sliver of darkness that seemed to be growing wider. The sound of the whispering grew louder and louder, and a scratching sound began to emanate from within the pack as the entire thing began to gently wriggle with movement from within. I stared in horror as an emaciated gray arm reached out from between the zipper, long, jagged nails scrabbling for something to grasp onto. Will. The voice was frail, yet familiar, and it came from inside the bag. I shot awake as my eyes darted around the room. There was no whispering, and all the lights were still out. I climbed out of bed and stepped into the living room, staring down at the backpack. What the hell was that dream about? It felt so real. I knelt in front of the couch. My entire body trembled with anxiety as I reached for the zipper on the backpack, then faltered. Was I really ready for this? Opening the backpack meant facing the memory of losing my best friend all over again. I took a breath, and before I could second-guess myself, I reached out and pulled the bag open in one quick motion. What? I muttered. I looked over the contents in confusion. There was an old water bottle, a Kiss t-shirt, and right there on top of the pile, staring me right in the face, the map. This wasn't my backpack. The memory came rushing back. That school year, Kyle and I had gotten the same blue backpack. This was his. He must have grabbed mine when we left by mistake. I felt tears running down my cheeks as I dug through my long-lost friend's belongings. It felt a little intrusive, but it was also good to see some of his old things again. I looked over the map we had made and realized it was a lot more detailed than I remembered. There was the big rock we had climbed on, but then further up on the page, Kyle had drawn a cluster of trees with some kind of strings or ropes hanging from the branches. Kyle hadn't been the best artist, but I could make out different splotches of color on the strings. For some reason, looking at the picture made me feel uncomfortable and a little afraid. I decided that I had seen enough for now. I put everything back into the bag and zipped it closed. I couldn't believe it had taken me nearly 10 years to work up the courage to open it. It was nice to be reminded of the fun I had with my friend, and it also seemed like a little bit of weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I flopped back onto my bed, my mind buzzing with questions that would probably never be answered. Why had Kyle left? Where had he gone? Why did the trees on the map make me so unsettled? Eventually, my mind quieted, and I drifted back to sleep. The next few days were pretty uneventful. Mom and Dad came over and helped me unpack the rest of my things from the moving van. The apartment had begun to feel a bit homier. "How have you been doing?" Mom had asked. I sighed, knowing full well what she wanted to ask. "Leave him alone, Jan. He'll talk when he's ready," said Dad, putting a hand on her shoulder. No, it's fine," I said, taking a breath. I opened the backpack. Both of my parents stopped what they were doing and focused on me. It turns out when Kyle left, he took my backpack by mistake. It was his we had all this time. Mom looked like she was about to break into tears. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That must have been so difficult." "Actually..." "What was in it?" Dad interrupted. I shrugged. "Just some of Kyle's old stuff. It felt weird digging through it, but also kind of cathartic." Mom stepped forward, wrapping me in a hug. "I'm so proud of you, Will. This was a big step." I returned Mom's hug, but I couldn't help noticing the look of concern on Dad's face. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked. He looked up at me. "Oh, nothing. I just can't believe I never thought to make sure the backpack was yours. I remember now that you two had the same one." "It's a shame we didn't realize before Kyle's family moved away," said Mom. "We could have given it to them." "What do you plan on doing with it?" asked Dad. "Well, I'd still like to return it to his family. I just don't know how to get in touch with them." Dad nodded. "I think that's a good idea, son. Do you want us to hang on to it? See if we can track them down?" "I'm sure we could find them online somehow. Maybe Facebook or something," said Mom. I shook my head. Thanks, guys, but this feels like something I should do. Maybe returning it will give me some kind of closure. They both nodded in understanding. But for some reason, I had the feeling that Dad was upset about my decision. That night, after my parents had left, I decided to search online for Kyle's family. After about an hour of searching Facebook and a bunch of random people finder websites and having no luck, I decided to call it quits and go to bed. I was pretty tired from unpacking, so sleep came easily. Will. I sat up groggily. What, dude? Come check this out, came a voice from the front room. I climbed out of bed and stumbled to my bedroom doorway. I blinked in confusion, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Instead of the darkened front room, the doorway led to a brightly lit forest. I stepped through the threshold, feeling the crackle of leaves and the cool dirt under my bare feet. Will! A familiar voice called in the distance. Kyle? Is that you? I called out. Come check this out! I stepped further into the forest, and as I did, I felt a cool breeze at my back. I turned to see that the doorway to my bedroom was now gone. Kyle! I called out. Where are you? I saw a flash of color moving behind a tree in the distance. Hey, wait! I yelled as I ran after him. When I got to the spot I had seen him, he was gone. I spun in a circle looking for any sign of my friend. Kyle! There was another flash of movement, but it was back where I had started from. I ran after him. Stop, man, just wait! But again, when I got to where I'd seen movement, there was nothing. Damn it! I began to wander aimlessly through the dense forest, looking for Kyle, for my bedroom, for a way out, for anything. After a time, I found my way into a clearing. There, I found my couch from my front room, and sitting on the couch, with his head in his hand, was Kyle. He looked almost the same as he did on the last day I saw him, only he was covered in dirt and scrapes. I cautiously approached him. Kyle? His head snapped up and he smiled wide. Hey, man, come check this out. Check what out? I asked nervously. His face was streaked with dirt and tears. He shook as he clenched something in his fist. I stepped closer. What is it? I asked. He smiled wider as fresh tears began to flow down his cheeks. Come check this out, he said through gritted teeth. I had the impulse to turn and run away from him, but curiosity drove me on. I reached out and placed my hand on his. His skin felt cold and dry, but the shaking stopped. His fist was clenched tight, but I managed to pry his fingers open. I stared down in confusion. His hand had been empty. There was a slight discoloration at the center of his palm. The skin had turned gray and cracked. Before I could ask what it meant, the discoloration began to spread out until it completely covered his hand and his fingers began to break away. I looked up into his face and fell back in fear and disgust. His eyes had rolled back and his cheeks had sunken as the decay began to cover his entire body. No, no, no! I started to panic as his body began to crumble right in front of me. I reached out, trying to hold my friend together, but there was nothing I could do. He slowly disintegrated into a pile of bones and dust in my hands as I screamed and screamed. Kyle! I came awake, screaming and thrashing, trying desperately to hold on to what was left of my friend. It took me a moment to realize I was out of the dream. I sat there gasping for air, wondering what the fuck was happening to me. Why had that felt so real? I looked at the time on my phone. It was already 3 a.m. I wouldn't be getting back to sleep after that, so I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. After downing the first glass, I turned on the sink for a refill. As I did, I looked up into the front room and felt my stomach drop. There on the couch was Kyle's backpack. I swore I had put it away in the back of my closet, but there it was. But that wasn't the worst part. On the carpet in front of the couch was a pair of small, dirty footprints. I stepped up on the couch, looking down at the backpack. How did it get here? Was that really just a dream? It had to be a dream. Maybe I'd gotten it back out and just forgotten about it? My eyes slipped from the couch to the floor, to those impossible footprints that my mind had refused to believe were real. Only now, I couldn't look away from them. I took a breath and tried to clear my head. If this wasn't just a dream, then what was it? Was Kyle trying to tell me something? Of course he was, but what? A warning? A message? A clue? What was I missing? My vision drifted back to the couch. Was there something in the backpack I had missed? That had to be it. I grabbed the pack and ripped it open before dumping the contents out onto the floor. I fell to my knees and pawed through it all, scanning over every item, looking for something, for anything of significance. I found nothing new. I began to feel like I was losing my mind. Maybe it was just a dream. Come on, man, what am I missing? I waited for an answer, but then realized I was talking to an empty apartment and shook my head in frustration. I began stuffing everything back into the backpack. It was just a dream, I thought to myself. I was just stressed and the bag was bringing up old trauma. Zipping the backpack closed, I picked it up, ready to toss it back into my closet. I made it halfway across the room when I realized I was gripping onto something within the folds of the blue material. I stopped and unzipped the backpack. Just underneath the outer flap was a small Velcro pocket, one that I hadn't noticed until now. The sound of the Velcro ripping open was the loudest sound in the world. I reached into the pocket and removed the object within. When I opened my fist and saw the thing resting in the center of my palm, I felt goosebumps rise on my skin, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It was a small length of twine, with white and red beads, and a small shard of bone tied to one end. There were carvings on the beads, but they made no sense. Just swirls and loops surrounding odd letters of some kind. I felt panic rising within me. I had seen this before. Tears burned in my eyes as the memory came rushing back, all at once. "Will, come check this out," Kyle called to me. "What is it?" I asked. We had been charting a path through the woods and were a good way into the adventure. We already had several markers drawn on our map. Kyle was facing away from me, but turned and held up a small piece of twine that had been tied to a tree branch. At the end of the twine were several carved beads and what looked like a small piece of bone. "I don't know, man, but it's kind of cool looking," said Kyle. "Maybe it's off of a necklace or something?" Kyle shook his head. "Nah, if it was a necklace, there wouldn't be so many of them." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Just look," he said as he pointed ahead through the trees. As I looked, I felt something cold wriggle up my spine. There were dozens of strands dangling from the trees ahead of us. Several held multicolored beads and bones fragments, and a few seemed to hold bits of cloth or hair. "I think we should go back," I said, staring ahead. "What, are you scared? Are the strings gonna get you?" said Kyle, chuckling. "Dude, I'm more worried about whoever put them there." Kyle scoffed. "Look, man, they are super old. I bet whoever put them there is long gone by now. Let's put this spot with the strings on the map, then go a little further until we find the next thing to put on the map. Then we can go back. We still have some daylight left." I didn't like it, but I couldn't let him know how freaked out I actually was. "All right, but just until we find the next map marker." As we walked through the trees, I did my best to avoid touching the dangling strands. I couldn't believe how high some of them reached. Some had to be nearly to the treetops. Who would go through all this trouble, and why? Suddenly, Kyle came to an abrupt stop right in front of me. I began to ask what was wrong, but he held a hand up to silence me. He pointed a finger to his ear. He wanted me to listen. I stood as still and quiet as I could, straining my ears. For a moment, all I could hear was the wind through the trees. Then I heard it. The sound of someone talking, somewhere off in the distance. The voice sounded strange and rhythmic, almost like singing. But the tone was just wrong somehow, and I couldn't make out any actual words. Whatever it was, I didn't like it. I tapped Kyle on the shoulder and silently mouthed, "Let's go." He nodded, and we began to slowly back away. As we did, I stumbled and fell onto a fallen branch that snapped loudly. Kyle reached out his hand to help me up. When I looked up at him, his eyes were widening in fear. It took me a second longer to realize what was wrong. The voice had stopped. As he pulled me to my feet, the forest went deathly silent. Suddenly, we heard a new sound, growing louder and louder. The sound of leaves crunching under running feet. Someone was running through the forest, and they were coming closer. We turned and ran as fast as we could back through the woods, down the paths we had just blazed. I never turned back, but I would have sworn someone was running right behind us. Ahead of me, Kyle tripped over a stump and fell to the ground hard. As he struggled to climb to his feet, I spun, planning on pulling my knife from my belt to defend him. Instead, I spun too quick and fell to the ground next to him. To my surprise, there was no one behind us. "Where'd they go?" I asked. "I don't know. Did you see them?" groaned Kyle, rubbing his ankle. "No, I didn't want to look back." "Me neither, man. And what was that singing? It sounded like church music or something," said Kyle. "You mean hymns?" "Yeah, kinda. Anyway, let's get back and tell my dad." We dusted ourselves off and headed back to our campsite. It was starting to get dark just as we made it back to camp. Dad already had a roasting fire going and greeted us with sticks for roasting hot dogs. "Hey guys, how'd the adventure go?" Dad asked. "We found some weird stuff in the woods. I think someone else might be out here," I said. "Yeah," Kyle interrupted. "We heard someone singing, and we heard footsteps running after us." Dad looked at us dubiously. "Did you actually see someone?" I shrugged. "Well, no, but Kyle's right, we heard them singing, and then running after us. And we found these hanging all over the place in one part of the woods," said Kyle, holding out the strand he had shown me. "You dumbass, you kept that thing?" I exclaimed. "Will?" Dad snapped his fingers at me. "Language." "Sorry," I muttered. Dad took the strand of twine from Kyle and examined it. Looks like a Native American artifact of some kind to me." "Really?" Kyle and I said in unison. "Looks like it. Anyway, it doesn't seem like anything to worry about to me," he said. "What about the singing and footsteps we heard?" asked Kyle. Dad just shook his head. "Boys, the wind through the trees can make some strange sounds. And as far as the footsteps go, there are lots of animals out here. Could have just been a deer or a fox or something." I had to admit, Dad's explanation of things did make me feel a little better. Kyle stuffed the strand back into his backpack and tossed it onto the ground by his tent. With our mood lightened, we cooked and ate our hot dogs and marshmallows. We stayed up late into the night, sitting around the campfire, talking, joking, and telling spooky stories. Eventually, after Dad had stretched and yawned his big, dramatic yawn for the third time, a sure sign that he was ready to get to bed, he stood and said, "Okay, guys, I'm gonna hit the sack. Stay up as late as you want. Just remember to put out the fire before bed. We told him goodnight and watched as he climbed into his tent and was snoring within minutes. After a few minutes of silence, I turned to Kyle. Hey man, I think I'm ready for bed too. He nodded. Yeah, I'm barely keeping my eyes open at this point. We stood and kicked dirt over the fire until the glow of the embers was all but gone. Our flashlights lit the campsite in bright beams as we made our way to our tent. Kyle picked up his backpack and tossed mine to me before unzipping his tent. Hey, I said before climbing into my tent. I know Dad said it was nothing to worry about, but we should take it back tomorrow, Kyle interrupted. I nodded. Yeah, I think we should. Having decided to return the artifact, as Dad called it, we climbed into our tents. Night, Kyle. Night, Will. Some time later, I heard a noise outside my tent. I was in that place between dreaming and waking, and the sound was distant, indistinct. The noise eventually resolved into something I could recognize. Someone was whispering. I couldn't tell what the words were, though. They seemed far away and muffled. What? I called out, thinking maybe it was Kyle or Dad trying to whisper to me. When I called out, the whispering stopped, and I could hear movement. I came awake enough to sit up and look around the inside of my tent. It had been a full moon that night, so there was plenty of light to show the shadow moving along the outside of my tent. I focused on the figure, sure now that it wasn't Dad or Kyle. It could have just been the distortion of the shadow on my tent's fabric, but it looked wrong somehow. Tall and hunched over. I wanted to call out for my dad, but I couldn't find my voice. The figure moved on towards Kyle's tent and began whispering again. The voice was horrible. It was full of hatred, both frail and menacing. Most of the whispered words I couldn't understand, but two made their way to the front of my horrified mind. Flesh. Thief. They were here for Kyle. I was still too afraid to speak, but I had to do something. Climbing to my feet, I quietly made my way to my tent opening and unzipped it just enough to peek out. The figure had its back to me. They wore some kind of long cloak made of animal hide, and had a mass of long, tangled gray hair hanging down from a bowed head, topped with some kind of headdress, topped with deer antlers. I began to scream for my dad or for Kyle, but the figure whipped around and looked right at me. It was an old woman, her face lined with wrinkles and covered in dirt. The headdress wasn't a headdress. The antlers were protruding from the skin on her forehead. I fell back into my tent, praying she hadn't seen me. I crawled over and into my sleeping bag, covering my head. After a moment of silence, I peeked my head out from under my sleeping bag. She was right there. I left my tent partially unzipped. I hadn't heard any sound of movement, but there she was peeking back at me through my open tent flap. The shock and terror of that face brought my voice back, and I screamed, "Dad, help!" The woman turned and ran. There was a rustle of movement outside, and suddenly Kyle was screaming, "Help me! Will! Someone help, please!" I couldn't look. I covered my head and continued yelling for my dad. "Will? Kyle!" Dad began shouting. "What's wrong?" "Please help me! Will!" Kyle shouted for the last time as his voice quickly faded into the distance. Kyle was gone. She took him. Later, after I told the police what I saw, Dad came and sat next to me. During the commotion, his tent zipper had gotten stuck. He eventually just ripped it open, but by that time it was too late. "Will, are you sure about what you think you saw?" he asked. I looked up at him. It was an old woman. She came from the woods and took Kyle. "And she took him because of the twine thing?" he asked. I shrugged. "I think so. I heard her say thief." Dad was silent for a moment, then said, "The police say that he took his backpack with him, that the tent was just unzipped." "I know what they think. He didn't run away. She took him." I turned to face him. "Didn't you hear him screaming for help? You know Kyle. You know he wouldn't run away. Why don't you believe me?" He put his hand on my shoulder. "Son, I can't imagine how you're feeling right now. And I believe that you believe what you're saying. I never saw an old woman, and I only heard you screaming. I don't want to believe that Kyle would run away either, but he had a rough home life. Maybe we don't always know people as well as we think we do." Over the next few days, the police searched the entire forest from end to end. They found no sign of Kyle, no sign of the woman, and no sign of the twine artifacts. After a week, the search was called off. Without a body, Kyle was labeled a runaway. His picture was on the news for a while. His parents went from town to town hanging up missing persons posters, but nothing ever came of it. Time passed and Kyle was forgotten. Somewhere along the way, I started to believe that he had run away, just like everyone said. I remember now. I remember the truth. I don't know how much my dad knows, but thinking back now, I don't know if I can trust him. She was real. And she's out there. I think I have to go back. I have to find the truth for myself, to know that I'm not crazy. Kyle, I'm coming.